Tonight, every story you hear is real. Apartments, barns, dorm rooms, family homes, ordinary places where something impossible happened and never really left. Before we begin, answer me one thing in the comments. Do you believe these are hauntings or broken minds? Grab your headphones, kill the lights, and let's start. I was around 8 years old when we moved into the house I still think about to this day. It was sometime in 2005, and even though I was young, I remember a lot of small details very clearly. Some of them are normal childhood memories, but others still don't sit right with me even now. The first thing I remember about that house was the front door. It was ugly, plain, and honestly kind of depressing to look at. It didn't match the rest of the house at all. But what made it worse was that it didn't work properly. The locking mechanism inside the door was broken, and instead of fixing it right away, my parents just removed the mechanism completely. Because of that, the doorknob didn't actually control anything anymore. You could stand there and spin the knob in either direction as much as you wanted, and nothing would happen. The door wouldn't open or close because of it. To open it, you had to physically push or pull the door itself. And the knob was basically useless, just something that spun freely for no reason. As a kid, I thought it was weird, but I got used to it pretty quickly. One night, not long after we had moved in, something happened that I can still picture perfectly. It was late, and the house was quiet. I was getting ready to go upstairs to my room. I don't remember exactly what time it was, but it felt like one of those nights where everything is still and silent. My parents were in another part of the house, and nothing seemed out of the ordinary. As I walked past the front door, something caught my attention. The doorknob was spinning. At first, I just stopped and stared at it. It wasn't moving slowly either. It was turning continuously, like someone on the other side was grabbing it and twisting it over and over again. The way it moved made it very clear that it wasn't random. It looked intentional. For a second, I thought maybe someone was outside trying to come in. Even though the knob didn't actually control the door, someone from outside wouldn't know that. They might think turning it would open the door. So I walked closer, feeling a little confused but not fully scared yet. I reached out, grabbed the door, and pulled it open. There was no one there. I looked outside for a moment. It was completely empty. No movement, no sound, nothing that suggested anyone had been standing there just seconds before. It felt strange, but I told myself maybe I imagined the movement or didn't see it clearly. I closed the door again and turned away, ready to just go upstairs and forget about it. Then it happened again. The doorknob started spinning. This time, there was no doubt. I was standing right there, watching it. It was turning the same way, over and over, like someone was deliberately trying to open the door. I felt a strange mix of confusion and fear. I knew how that door worked. I knew the knob didn't do anything unless someone physically touched it. It wasn't connected to anything inside anymore. The only way it could move like that was if someone was actually turning it, but I had just checked. There was no one outside. Still, I stepped forward again and pulled the door open. Again, nothing. The porch was empty. The yard was still. There was nowhere for anyone to hide in that moment. It didn't make any sense. I slowly closed the door again, this time not turning away. I just stood there staring at the knob, trying to understand what I was seeing. For a few seconds, nothing happened. Then, right in front of me, it started spinning again. At that point, I wasn't just confused anymore. I was frozen. I didn't move, didn't speak, didn't even really think. I just watched it, and then everything changed in an instant. Without any warning, the entire door suddenly flew inward. It didn't just open, it came off its hinges with force, like something had slammed into it from the other side. The door hit me hard, pushing me backward before I could react. I lost my balance and my head slammed into the corner of the wall behind me. I remember the impact more than anything else. A sharp, crushing pain, followed by this strange, distant feeling like everything was fading out. There was blood, a lot of it, and I could barely understand what was happening. After that, things get blurry, and I ended up in the hospital with a severe concussion and a split in my head that needed treatment. I stayed there for several days. The doctors asked questions, my parents asked questions. Everyone wanted to know what happened, but I didn't tell them the truth. I told them I had fallen while holding onto the door, that I slipped, lost my grip, and hit my head. It sounded believable enough, and honestly, I knew they wouldn't have believed me if I told them what really happened. Even as a kid, I understood that, so I kept it to myself. The door frame had to be completely replaced after that. The damage was too bad to fix. We got a new door, a proper one that actually worked, and for a while things felt normal again. But that wasn't the end of it. A few years passed, and life went on. I got older, and the memory of that night faded into something distant, but never completely gone. Then, when I was around 12, something else happened. It was late again, or probably around 3 in the morning. My brother and I were in the office room in the house. We were just hanging out talking, doing whatever kids do when they're trying to stay awake way past when they should be asleep. The house was quiet, just like that night years before. Then we heard a sound, a bell. Not just any bell, though. It was very specific. It sounded exactly like the small bell you find on a tricycle or a bike. That sharp, metallic ring that's impossible to mistake. Oh, both of us froze. We looked at each other immediately because we both heard it clearly. It wasn't faint or distant. It sounded like it came from somewhere inside the house. We knew for a fact that we were the only ones awake. Our parents were asleep, and no one else was in the house. There was no reason for a sound like that to happen. The bell rang again. At that point, we were both scared. Not just a little uneasy, but genuinely freaked out. It didn't make sense, and there was no easy explanation for it. We decided to check the house. We moved carefully, trying to stay quiet, listening for any other sounds. We checked room after room, looking for anything that could explain what we heard. There was nothing. No objects out of place, no signs of anyone moving around, nothing that could have made that sound. Eventually, we gave up and went back, trying to convince ourselves it was just something random or something we misunderstood. But it didn't feel that way. The next night made things worse. I was alone in the office at around the same time. My brother wasn't with me this time, which somehow made everything feel more intense. And then I heard it again. The same bell. Clear, sharp, and unmistakable. My heart started racing immediately. I felt that same kind of fear, but stronger this time, because I was alone. I grabbed the closest thing I could use to defend myself, which ended up being a glass cup. It wasn't much, but it was something. I held it tightly and slowly started moving through the house, trying to find the source of the sound. Every step felt heavy. Every small noise made me tense. When I reached the kitchen, I stopped. Something was there. I stared at the floor, trying to process what I was seeing. It was my old tricycle, the same one I had when I was 8 years old, the same one we had sold at a garage sale before we even moved into this house. And it was moving, It slowly rolled across the kitchen floor as if someone had just pushed it. The movement was smooth and steady, not like it had been knocked over or fallen. There was no one there, no one behind it, no one near it, nothing that could have caused it to move. And then the bell rang again, right there in front of me. I couldn't move, I couldn't think. I just stood there, watching something that should not have been there at all. That tricycle was gone years ago. I knew that. I remembered selling it. I remembered it being taken away. But somehow, it was in my house, and it was moving on its own. After that night, I never looked at that house the same way again. Things didn't stop there either. Over time, more small, strange things kept happening. Not always as intense as those moments, but enough to make me feel like something wasn't right. It became a pattern, weird sounds, things moving when they shouldn't. That constant feeling that something was there, even when you couldn't see it. I never really found an explanation for any of it. And honestly, I'm not sure I want one. All I know is that ever since we moved into that house, things like this have happened to me more than once. Enough times that I stopped trying to convince myself it was all just coincidence. Because some things don't feel like accidents. Some things feel like they're happening on purpose. And that's the part that still stays with me. For a while in my early 20s, I lived in one of those strange little spaces that feel halfway between cozy and creepy. It was a one-bedroom studio apartment built over a detached two-car garage, all the way at the very end of a long driveway behind a house. People sometimes call them mother-in-law apartments. Mine was basically a box over the garage, with one door at the bottom that got you into the garage and up the stairs to my place. The setup was simple. When you walked upstairs, you came into one open room. Right in the center of that room was my bed, pointed straight toward this huge old-style HTDV I had. It was a beast of a thing, one of the very last big models they made before the flat screens took over. It was about 45 inches across, but the whole unit stood close to 5 feet tall and weighed a ridiculous amount. It had that thick, deep back on it, like a piece of furniture as much as a TV. You didn't move it without help. Here to the left of my bed was the kitchen and dining area, a small counter, a sink, an old stove, a tiny table. To the right of the bed was the stairwell that led down to the garage. There was no door at the top of the stairs, just an open entryway. The only actual door between me and the outside world was at the very bottom. Once you opened that exterior door, you stepped straight into the garage, and from there, the stairs went directly up to my apartment. No extra locks, no second door. Just that one door at ground level. The garage itself was its own kind of unsettling. It was filled to the brim with old antiques and random junk the owners had collected over the years. Old furniture, boxes, tools, trunks, all stacked and piled so that they formed narrow little paths instead of open space. Even during the daytime, with the big garage door open, the place gave off a strange feeling. At night, with only the single overhead bulb on, it was downright creepy. At the time, and I was in college and broke, so the place was perfect for me. Cheap rent, my own entrance, my own mini-kingdom over the garage. I had a decent sound system set up to go with that huge TV too. Music, movies, video games, everything sounded big and loud in that small space. Later on, I upgraded my sound system, bought a newer one, and pulled out the old one. I planned to give the old system and its controller to a friend. I remember taking it all downstairs and loading it into my truck out front. The speakers, the main unit, The chunky old remote, I put all of it in the truck so I wouldn't forget to drop it off. That's important because of what happened that night. The night of the incident started out completely normal. I can't remember what I watched that evening, some show or movie on that massive TV, but there was nothing strange about the day. No weird sounds, no scary thoughts, nothing that made me think, oh, tonight something's going to happen. At some point I turned everything off, climbed into bed in the middle of the room, and went to sleep with the image of the TV screen facing me. At some point during the night, I started to dream. It was one of those rare dreams where your brain uses your real environment almost exactly the way it is. In the dream, I was lying in my bed in that same studio apartment. The TV was in front of me in its usual place, where everything looked and felt the same as it did when I'd fallen asleep. But the TV wasn't showing Netflix or a movie or anything I owned. Instead, it was displaying what looked like a security camera feed. In the dream, my TV was acting like a big security monitor with 4 separate camera views divided across the screen in a 2x2 grid. There were 4 little live feeds, each one from a different angle outside the building. In real life, I didn't have any cameras. There were no security systems installed, no closed circuit setup. But in the dream, it all felt completely normal. Like, of course, I had a camera system, and of course it was wired into my TV. I remember focusing on the top left frame first. It showed part of the driveway and the path leading toward the back where the garage and my apartment were. It was dim, nighttime, but the camera image was clear enough to see shapes. That's when I saw it. From the edge of the frame, an apparition began to walk toward the camera. I can't give it a perfect description even now, because it didn't look like a regular person. It had a human shape, but felt wrong somehow, like its outline was slightly off, or its movements were just a bit too stiff or too smooth. It was dark, almost like a shadow that had thickened and taken on a body. It walked straight toward the camera, slow and steady. As soon as it reached the camera, it leaned in close, and its head snapped toward the lens. Its mouth opened, and then it tore open wider, much wider than any normal human mouth could. It stretched in a horrible way, skin pulling taut, as it let out a scream. The scream wasn't a normal human scream either. It had something animal in it, something twisted, something that sounded like pain and rage and hate all at once. It was a blasting, demonic sound that made me flinch, even though I was only watching. At the exact moment it screamed into the camera, that particular feed cut out. The small frame that had been showing the driveway went crazy for a second with static and distortion, then turned into the grey and black fuzz of a dead channel, the same type of static you see when there's no signal at all. I could hear that sound now too. The hiss and roar of TV static growing louder. My eyes shifted to the next camera. In the top right frame, I saw a different angle somewhere on the property. That thing, whatever it was, appeared again, or farther away this time, but walking closer, following the layout of the land exactly as if it knew where every camera was. It came right up to that camera and did the same thing, mouth ripping open wide, unleashing that awful demonic scream. The second camera glitched, broke, and turned to static, another little box of dead channel. I could feel it getting closer, bottom right frame now. Different angle again, closer to the side of the garage, showing the base of the stairs that led up to my apartment. The apparition walked into that frame, coming from the distance, moving toward me from below. It got closer and closer, then once again reached the camera, leaned in, screamed, killed it with that harsh energy. Another knot of static filled the square. The sound of the static was growing. Those 3 dead feeds were all combining into a louder, more chaotic roar. I could barely hear anything else. The volume in the dream felt like it was being cranked higher and higher. Then my sight went to the last frame, the bottom left one. This one was aimed right at my front door. In real life, that would have been the camera mounted directly above the door at the bottom of the stairs, inside the garage, looking at the only barrier between me and outside. In the dream, I could see the door clearly, closed, with the apparition now standing just in front of it. It started slamming on the door. Every hit made the entire TV shake in the dream. The camera feed showed the door rattling hard in its frame. The noise from the static roared even louder, like the entire TV was locked on a dead channel at maximum volume, plus these heavy booms of whatever it was pounding on the wood. My heart was pounding as I lay there in the dream, watching it all, hearing it all. I knew that door, knew exactly how far down the stairs it was from where I slept. The thing in the camera wasn't some far-off shape anymore. It was right at the threshold to my world. Then it broke the door. The camera feed showed the door flying inward as the apparition lunged forward, and as it hit the camera, that final frame went to static too. All 4 little boxes on my TV screen merged into one massive, full-screen storm of noise and meaningless black and white dots. The sound was deafening. It was that specific, horrible hiss and roar you get from a dead TV channel, or turned up to a level no one would ever use on purpose. And at that exact moment, I woke up. For a second, I thought maybe I was still dreaming, because what I woke up to was almost exactly what I had just seen in the dream. I was lying in my bed, exactly where I had been. The TV in front of me was on, glowing, and the screen was filled with grey and black static. No menu, no screensaver, no input label, just a dead channel. The speakers were blaring that same hissing, roaring noise at full blast. It was so loud my chest felt it. On top of that, I could hear something else. The sound of wind moving through my apartment. A low, constant rushing noise that did not belong in a closed room. I turned my head and saw that the door at the top of the stairs, the entry from the garage into my living space, was standing wide open. Cold air was pouring in. It made the curtains near the kitchen side move. It carried the faint smell of oil and dust from the garage below. I shot fully awake in an instant, adrenaline slamming through me. I looked down and realized I had a remote in my hand. I was already, without quite remembering picking it up, jabbing the volume button over and over, trying to turn down that awful static sound. Nothing happened. The volume didn't change at all. For a half second, I thought maybe the remote's batteries were dead. Then I caught a glimpse of the reflection in the TV screen. The TV was bright enough to show a faint reflection of my bed and my own upper body. In that ghostly mirror, I saw my own hand, and I saw the shape of the remote I was holding. My stomach dropped. The remote in my hand wasn't the one for my current sound system. It was the controller for my old sound system, the one I had taken out to my truck, along with the rest of the old equipment, earlier that day. That remote had no business being in my apartment, let alone in my hand. In that moment, was standing there in dim light with the TV screaming static, the door open, the wind pushing in, and the wrong remote in my hand. My brain felt like it was splitting between trying to find a rational explanation and wanting to panic. I threw the remote aside, jumped out of bed, and went for the lights. I hit every switch I could. The overhead light in the main room flicked on, throwing strong, yellow light over the bed, the TV, the kitchen, and the open stairwell. It didn't make me feel much safer, but at least I could see. I went to the TV and manually turned the volume knob down on the speakers. The noise dropped from a deafening roar to a harsh whisper, then to nothing. The sudden silence felt almost worse. My ears rang faintly from the volume, and my heart was thudding so hard I could feel it in my fingers. For a few seconds I just stood there, looking from the now silent TV to the open doorway leading to the stairs. Past that open doorway, the stairwell went down into shadow. At the bottom of those stairs was the garage. Once I went down, I'd be in that space full of old antiques, boxes, and dark corners. And I knew for a fact there was no door between the top of the stairs and the bottom one, only that single outside door, which I could not see from where I stood. That meant if the outside door was open too, or had been forced, there was a clear line from the ground level straight up into my room. Part of me screamed that I needed to go down and check the door, make sure it was closed and locked, make sure no one was down there. Another part of me said just as loudly that I did not want to step foot in that garage at night, in the dark, right after the dream I'd had. The idea of walking between those stacks of old furniture and antiques, when my mind was full of an image of something breaking in and climbing those stairs, was almost unbearable. Still, I knew at least one thing needed to be done. The door at the bottom had to be closed. So I crept toward the stairwell, every light in my apartment blazing behind me. I moved slowly, my breathing shallow, and stepped onto the first stair. The wood creaked under my weight in a way it never had bothered me before, but now sounded like shouting. I didn't go all the way down. I went down just far enough that I could lean over and see the bottom of the stairwell and the door area without stepping into the main garage space. The light from the stairwell bulb reached far enough to show me the door. It was open, the night air flowing in from outside. I could see a slice of driveway and darkness beyond. I reached out, grabbed the door handle from where I was, and pulled it closed hard. I didn't slam it, but I shut it firmly and turned the lock. Then I backed up the stairs, not taking my eyes off that lower level until I was back up in the bright light of my apartment. The thought of going into the garage itself to look around, weaving between all those antiques and boxes to see if someone had been there, never really got past the feeling in my gut that said, don't. I decided that if anything was down there, it could stay there for the rest of the night. I was not going hunting for it. Once I was back in the main room, I checked the windows, checked my own door again at the top of the stairs, made sure everything I could control was locked. Then I sat down at the top of the stairs with my back to the wall, all the lights on, and just waited. The TV was off now. The speakers were silent. The only sounds were the faint hum of the refrigerator, the occasional tick of the building settling, and my own breathing. It was maybe the quietest that apartment had ever been. No music, no show, no background noise. And somehow, the silence felt even heavier than the static had. Every small sound seemed huge. Any creak in the wood made me look up. I sat there feeling like if I turned everything off and lay back down in bed, that soundless, dark space in front of the TV would swallow me. So I didn't. I just stayed at the top of the stairs, where I could see both the open room and the stairwell down, and watched the hours crawl by. Eventually, very slowly, the black outside the windows began to turn the slightest bit grey. Night eased into early morning. The fear didn't exactly go away, but it softened enough that I felt like I could move again. I got dressed, grabbed my stuff, and left for my college classes way earlier than I ever normally would, glad to be anywhere other than that apartment. I never really did figure out what happened that night. Maybe there was some weird coincidence with the TV turning itself on and landing on a dead channel. Maybe I had brought the old remote back inside without remembering it. Maybe the wind had opened the door on its own. I have tried, over and over, to put it into some neat, rational box. But the timing of the dream, the exact way it matched the real scene, the fact that the wrong remote was in my hand when I woke up, and the open door at the bottom of those stairs, all of that together is something I still can't explain, even to myself. What I remember most clearly after the loudest parts were over was that strange, thick quiet while I sat and waited for the sun to come up. Somehow, that silence was the worst part of all. About 8 months ago, I was living alone in an apartment where strange things happened almost every day. Doors would open on their own right in front of me. I'd hear noises with no clear source. Soft footsteps, light tapping, things shifting when nothing should have been moving. It was my first time living alone, but I had just gotten out of an abusive relationship, so despite everything, I was honestly just relieved to have my own space. I tried to ignore the weirdness and focus on the fact that I was finally safe and independent. Most nights, I convinced myself there was a logical explanation. Old building maybe, pipes, drafts, neighbors, anything but what my mind sometimes wanted to believe. I kept a routine to feel secure. I left the hallway light on, so a faint glow reached my bedroom. I kept a pistol on my nightstand, just in case. And I had my dog with me, a big lab mix who was always goofy, friendly, and, honestly, not much of a guard dog. He barked at squirrels, wagged his tail at strangers, and had never shown even the smallest hint of aggression. One night, after a long shift at the hospital, I came home completely drained. My whole body ached, and my mind felt foggy from exhaustion. I barely had the energy to change before collapsing into bed. My dog jumped up and curled at the foot like he always did, and the soft glow from the hallway light stretched across the floor and up the side of my bed. I remember thinking I needed to be up again at 6 in the morning, and then I was out almost instantly. I don't know how long I had been asleep when it started. At first it was just a sound, low and unfamiliar. It pulled me out of sleep slowly, like I was being dragged back into consciousness. Then I realized what it was. My dog was growling. Not a playful sound. Not the kind of noise he made when he was excited or dreaming. This was deep, low, and threatening. It was the kind of growl that vibrated, the kind that made your stomach drop before your brain could even process why. For a few seconds, I couldn't move. I was frozen, caught between sleep and reality, with my heart suddenly racing so hard it felt like it might burst out of my chest. My breathing was shallow, almost stuck, like my body didn't know whether to fight or shut down. Then my eyes opened, and I saw him. There was a figure standing right next to my bed, a man, tall, still, just there, as if he had always been there, and I had only just noticed him. The dim hallway light didn't fully reach his face, but it outlined him enough that there was no mistaking what I was seeing. But that wasn't the worst part. He wasn't alone. He had a woman held against him, his arm wrapped tightly around her neck like he was holding her hostage. Her body was stiff, almost unnatural, or like she wasn't struggling but wasn't at peace either. It was like watching a moment frozen in time, something violent that had already happened and was just being shown to me. My brain couldn't make sense of it. None of it felt real, but it didn't feel like a dream either. I was awake, fully awake. I could feel the sheets under my hands, the cold air on my skin, the pounding of my heart in my ears. Panic took over. I grabbed the pistol from my nightstand, my hands shaking so badly I could barely keep it steady. I pointed it straight at the man, every muscle in my body tense, ready for something, anything, to happen. I don't even remember if I said anything. I might have shouted. I might have been completely silent. Everything felt blurred, like my mind couldn't keep up with what was happening. And then, right as I aimed at him, he moved. He didn't run. He didn't react like a normal person would. He dragged the woman with him, who was still locked in his grip, and moved backward, straight through the wall. Not the door, not a window. The wall. They just passed through it, like it wasn't even there, like they had never been part of the same reality as me to begin with. I couldn't breathe. I sat there for a split second, staring at the empty space where they had been, trying to understand what I had just seen. My dog was still growling, staring at that exact spot, his body stiff and alert in a way I had never seen before. But that's when it hit me fully. I was not dreaming. Every instinct in my body screamed at me to get out. I didn't hesitate. I grabbed my dog, still shaking, still barely able to think, and ran out of the apartment as fast as I could. I didn't even stop to question it. I didn't look back. I just needed distance between me and whatever that was. I drove straight to a friend's house and stayed there for the night. I don't remember much of the drive. My hands were tight on the wheel, on my mind, replaying the image over and over again. The man, the woman. The way they disappeared like the wall meant nothing. After that, I couldn't see that apartment the same way again. Every creak, every shadow, every small, unexplained thing suddenly felt heavier, like there was something there I couldn't understand, something that had always been there, just waiting for me to notice it. Eventually I moved out. I didn't tell many people about what happened. It sounded insane, even to me. I tried to rationalize it, to convince myself it was some kind of waking dream or stress from work or exhaustion. But deep down, I knew how real it felt. Now I have a roommate. I never told her about any of it. I didn't want to put those ideas in her head or make her uncomfortable in a new place. But a couple of days after she moved in, she came to me with a strange look on her face and asked, almost casually, if I believed in ghosts. I laughed it off at first, trying to keep things light. But then she told me that her fan kept turning off in the middle of the night. Not once, but repeatedly. She'd wake up, turn it back on, and later it would be off again. She mentioned other small things too. Objects not where she left them, little noises she couldn't explain. She asked me if anything weird had ever happened in the apartment, and in that moment, I just looked at her, remembering everything. The doors, the noises, the figure, the woman. The way my dog growled like something truly dangerous was in the room. I told her no, but the truth is, I'm not sure I ever really left that experience behind. And sometimes, late at night, when everything is quiet, I still think about that moment, about what I saw, about what it could have been, and about whether it ever really left at all. I want to give a little background before getting into what happened, because the place itself matters as much as the experience. I grew up in the southern United States with my family in an area that carried a lot of history. It wasn't the kind of history people proudly show off either. It was the kind that sits quietly in the background, something everyone knows about but doesn't really talk about in detail. The area I lived in was once home to several wealthy plantation owners, and there were still large, old estates scattered around, some abandoned, some barely maintained, all of them carrying stories. When I was younger, my great-grandmother used to tell me stories about those places. She never told them in a way meant to scare me. In fact, she was careful with her words, almost like she was filtering things before saying them out loud. Looking back now, I realized she was giving me a softened version of events. Even then, I could tell there was more to the stories than what she was actually saying. There were hints of cruelty, pain, and things that didn't sit right, but she never went into detail. She always framed it as history, as something I should know about where I came from, not something to fear. One place she mentioned more than once was a large house sitting on a hill, just off a deep curve in the road. I knew exactly where it was. It wasn't too far from where we lived, but it always felt isolated. The road leading up to it curved sharply, and thick trees surrounded the area, making it feel cut off from everything else. She would always tell me not to hang around there, but she never clearly explained why. At the time, I just took it as one of those things adults say to kids. Years passed, and eventually my great-grandmother passed away. Life moved on, but her stories stayed with me in the back of my mind. One evening, I was sitting on the front porch with my dad. We were just relaxing, talking about old memories, and somehow the conversation turned to her. I brought up how she used to tell me stories about that house on the hill, and how she always warned me to stay away from it. When I said that, my dad gave me a strange look. It wasn't dramatic, just a subtle shift in his expression, but I noticed it right away. He asked me if I had ever been near that place, and if anything unusual had ever happened to me there. The way he asked made it clear he wasn't just making conversation. He was asking something specific. I told him that I didn't go that way often, but there was one time that stood out. I used to ride my motorcycle a lot, just cruising around for no real reason, and one day I happened to take that road. As I came up to the curve where the house sits, I remember hearing something that didn't make sense. Even over the sound of my engine, which was loud, and with my helmet on, I heard what sounded like a scream. Not just any scream, but the kind that sounds like someone is in serious pain. It cut through everything else, sharp and clear. It was enough to make me slow down and pull over to the side of the road. I took my helmet off and just sat there for a moment, listening. The area was quiet, almost too quiet. It's an old road, so you don't get much traffic, and at that moment there was nothing. No cars, no people, no movement. Just silence. I called out, asking if everything was okay, if someone needed help. My voice sounded louder than I expected in that empty space, but there was no response, nothing at all. I started to put my helmet back on, thinking maybe I had imagined it or misheard something. That's when I heard another sound. This one was different. It was the sound of chains dropping onto something wooden. It wasn't faint or unclear. It was distinct, like metal hitting a hard surface. The moment I heard it, I felt a chill run through me. The hairs on my arms and the back of my neck stood up, and I got this strong feeling that I shouldn't be there. It wasn't just fear, it was something deeper, like instinct telling me to leave. I didn't wait around. I put my helmet back on and took off as fast as I could, not even looking back at the house. When I finished telling my dad that story, he just sat there for a second, staring ahead. Then, he asked me something that caught me off guard. He asked if I had seen him. I didn't know what he meant, but something about the way he said it made me uneasy. I asked him who he was talking about, and for a moment it looked like he was about to explain. But instead, he stopped himself and changed direction completely. He started talking about when I was born. He said that, like him and his father before him, I was born with what he described as a thick layer of membrane over my face. He said his grandmother used to tell him that people born like that were able to see things that others couldn't. I didn't know how to react to that. Part of me wanted to brush it off as superstition, but the way he said it made it feel more personal to him. He went on to say that throughout his life, he had experienced things he couldn't explain. Nothing too extreme most of the time, just small things. Movement out of the corner of his eye that would disappear when he looked directly at it. Shapes or figures far off in the distance that didn't seem quite right. He said he got used to it over time and never really let it bother him. But then he told me there were 2 times in his life when he was genuinely scared, and both of those times happened near that same house. He said that when he was a teenager, he and his 2 brothers were riding their bicycles home after helping out on a farm. It was getting late, and the sun was starting to go down. As they approached that same stretch of road, they heard a scream, just like the one I described. All 3 of them stopped and looked around, trying to figure out where it came from. Then they heard the sound of chains hitting the ground off to their right. At that point, his brothers didn't hesitate. They took off immediately, riding as fast as they could. My dad, however, hesitated for just a second and looked toward the sound. And that's when he saw something. He told me he saw a man standing there. The man wasn't dressed like anyone from modern times. He had on what looked like rough burlap pants, no shirt, and there were chains hanging from him. My dad said the man's mouth was wide open, like he was screaming, but there was no sound coming from him at all. What disturbed him the most were the man's eyes. He said it looked like they were gone, like they had been removed, and there was something dark running down his face that he thought might have been blood. The moment he realized what he was looking at, he turned and ran. He rode as fast as he could, catching up to his brothers, and none of them stopped until they were far away from that place. Later, when they finally calmed down, he asked his brothers if they had seen the man. They told him no. They said they didn't see anything, but they felt something was wrong. It's something that told them to get out of there immediately. After he told me all of that, we both sat there in silence for a while. I could feel the weight of the story settling in. I finally asked him what he thought it was, what he believed he had seen. He told me that growing up, people used to talk about that house. According to what he had heard, terrible things had happened there during the time of slavery. He said there were stories about people being tortured in the attic, about suffering that went on behind closed doors, where no one could help. He believed that what he saw might have been the spirit of someone who died there, someone who went through unimaginable pain. He thought maybe it was trying to reach out, or maybe it was trapped, replaying something over and over again. He also believed that the reason both of us experienced something at that place might have something to do with what he called the birth veil, or that strange detail about how we came into the world. I'm not sure I believe that part, at least not fully, but I can't deny that hearing his story made me look back on a few things from my own life in a different way. The whole conversation left me with more questions than answers. I never went back to that house, and I don't plan to. There's something about it that doesn't feel right, like it holds on to the past in a way that hasn't faded with time. Even now, when I think about that day on my motorcycle, I can still hear that scream clearly in my head, and that sound of chains hitting wood, and knowing that my dad experienced something so similar years before I did makes it harder to explain it away as coincidence. He mentioned there was another time he had an experience at that house when he was older, but he didn't go into detail that night. Maybe he didn't want to, or maybe he was saving it for another time. As for me, I've had a few other strange things happen over the years too, things I don't really talk about much. Maybe one day I'll sit down and write them all out. But for now, that house on the hill is the one memory that stands out the most. Something that feels unfinished, like there's more to it than I'll ever fully understand. I've started to believe that my workplace might actually be haunted. It's not something I ever thought I'd say seriously, but after spending enough time there and seeing enough strange things, it's hard to completely ignore it. The building itself doesn't help either. It's an old barn, around 100 years old from what I've been told, and it used to be part of a livestock farm. Now, tucked into one corner of it, is the small family butcher shop where I work. During the day, it feels normal enough. Customers come in, people chat, and everything seems like any other small local shop. But there's something about the place that changes depending on the time of day and the time of year. Especially around Christmas, things start to feel different. Not just a little off, but genuinely unsettling in ways that are hard to explain. At first, it was small things, easy to brush off. A picture frame in the hallway would suddenly fall off the wall and shatter, even though it had been hanging there securely for years. Shelves that held bottles of liquor would break without warning, glass exploding outward as if something had pushed it from the inside. You'd hear the crash from another room and rush over, expecting to find some obvious cause. But there never was one. No one near it, nothing loose, nothing that made sense. Then there were the decorations. Every year we hang things from the ceiling. Simple holiday stuff, nothing heavy or complicated. And sometimes, completely out of nowhere, they start spinning. Not gently swaying like you'd expect from a breeze, but spinning fast, almost violently, like someone had grabbed them and twisted them with force. The air around them would feel still, no drafts, no open doors, nothing to explain it. You'd just stand there watching it happen, trying to figure out what you were missing. The stereo was another thing. It had a mind of its own. Or at least that's how it felt. It would randomly turn its volume up without anyone touching it. One of the waitresses swore that she was standing right there, physically turning the volume knob down, and it kept rising anyway, like something was pushing against her effort. She said it didn't feel like a malfunction. It felt like resistance. For a while, I had my own strange experience that no one else seemed to share. Every time I walked through a certain hallway, I would hear a ticking sound. It wasn't loud, but it was consistent, like a clock hidden somewhere out of sight. The strange part was that it only happened when I was in that hallway. As soon as I stepped out, it stopped. I tried to find the source, looked for clocks, pipes, anything that might make that kind of sound, but there was nothing. And then just as suddenly as it started, it disappeared. I haven't heard it since. There isn't much recorded history about the barn, at least not anything official or detailed. But over time, bits and pieces of stories have come up. People talk, especially in places like this. Someone mentioned that when the barn was being built, there were reports of children falling to their deaths. No one seems to know exactly how or why, just that it happened. Another story that gets repeated is that a woman was murdered there a long time ago. At some point, the family that runs the shop started calling whatever might be there Olivia. I don't know who came up with the name, but it stuck. It said, half jokingly most of the time, like a way to deal with the discomfort. If something falls or breaks, someone will say, "That's just Olivia," and try to laugh it off. But the laughter never lasts very long. As strange as all of that is, none of it compares to the story that really made me stop dismissing everything as coincidence. About 10 years ago, one of the workers came in early to start prepping before the rest of the staff arrived. It was quiet, just her in the building, going through her routine. At some point, she started to feel like she wasn't alone. Not in a vague way, but in that very specific heavy way where you're sure someone is watching you. She tried to ignore it at first, focusing on her work, but the feeling didn't go away. Then, out of the corner of her eye, she saw someone pass by the doorway. It was quick, just a glimpse, but enough to make her stop. Thinking it might be another employee who came in without her noticing, she walked into the hallway to check. That's when she saw him. She said he was standing there, completely still. A man dressed in all black formal clothes, like something from another time. He was wearing a top hat, the kind you don't see anymore except in old photographs. But the part that stayed with her, the part that made her certain this wasn't just her imagination, was his face. He didn't have one. Where his face should have been, there was nothing. No features, no eyes, no expression. Just a blank, empty surface. And yet, she said she could feel him looking directly at her, as if his attention was fixed on her completely. She froze. She couldn't move, couldn't speak, just stood there, staring back at something that shouldn't have been there. Then, just as suddenly as she had seen him, he was gone. No footsteps, no sound, nothing. To this day, she refuses to go into the barn alone. Even now, years later, if the topic comes up, you can see it in her face. She's not telling the story for attention or to scare people. It genuinely unsettled her in a way that never left. The longer I work there, the harder it is to brush everything off. Maybe there are explanations for some of it. Old building, faulty wiring, shifting wood, things like that. But when you start adding it all together, the falling objects, the spinning decorations, the stereo acting on its own, the unexplained sounds, and stories like hers, it starts to feel like more than just coincidence. I still go to work every day. I still walk those same hallways. But there are moments, especially when it's quiet, when I can't shake the feeling that I'm not alone in that building. And every time something moves or makes a sound that it shouldn't, there's always that thought in the back of my mind. Maybe Olivia isn't just a name people came up with to make jokes. Maybe something really is there, who's still moving through the barn, still watching, still making itself known in small, unsettling ways. I grew up in a massive 12-room house in Botswana, the kind of house that looks beautiful in daylight, but at night, when everything is quiet, feels almost like a maze. We had a lot of glass doors leading outside, letting in sunlight during the day, but at night they became windows into shadows and uncertainty. The house was surrounded by a high cement wall topped with electric fencing, which is fairly common there to keep intruders out. It gave us security, but it didn't stop the strange things that seemed to happen inside. The house was huge, and I often found myself alone in it. My family would be out or in other parts of the house, and I would be wandering from room to room, doing homework, watching TV, or just trying to sleep. It was during these times that I started noticing things I couldn't explain. The first were the noises. At night, I would hear movement downstairs. It was subtle, a sort of shuffling sound, like someone dragging their feet across the floor. It would only happen when I was outside my room, walking to the bathroom or just pacing the hallway. But every time I heard it, the alarm system on the first floor never went off. I thought maybe my imagination was playing tricks on me, the quiet of the empty house amplifying ordinary sounds. Not long after I started noticing the movement, another more unsettling thing happened. While trying to fall asleep in my room one night, I heard the sound of a glass tumbler rolling across the top of my dresser. I froze immediately, not daring to open my eyes. The sound was clear, deliberate, and impossible to ignore. I always kept a glass of water on my dresser, but I never left it on its side. That night, I realized the sound didn't come from anything I could explain. After that, I stopped bringing glasses into my room, and the noise stopped too. But every time I forgot and placed a glass on the dresser again, the sound would return. It was unnerving because it was precise, almost purposeful, like something was trying to get my attention. Living in a large house, it's easy to see shadows, catch movement out of the corner of your eye, or mistake a trick of the light for something real. But there was one incident that went beyond ordinary illusions. I was working late at night in the study downstairs, sitting at my computer and trying to finish an assignment. It was silent, and the kind of quiet that makes even the smallest noises echo. Suddenly, I had this gut feeling, a chilling, inexplicable warning that something was wrong. I can't describe it any other way than that it was a get out now feeling. My skin went cold and my heart started pounding. I decided to look around just to make sure everything was fine. The room was dark as usual, nothing unusual at first glance, but then my eyes were drawn to the glass door leading out to the ground level veranda. Outside, standing perfectly still, was a figure. At first, my mind raced to a logical explanation. A thief, an intruder. In Botswana, that's not a small worry. But as I stared, something felt wrong. The figure didn't move at all, not a single inch. The alarm system on the outside wall was powerful, nearly impossible to bypass without triggering it, so it couldn't be anyone who had just walked in. The figure was dark, almost entirely black and fuzzy, like it was out of focus. I couldn't see any details. No face, no clothing, just a presence, standing there, seemingly facing me. I froze, unable to move, my eyes locked on it for what felt like an eternity. My brain was screaming at me to do something, but my body refused to respond. After a minute, or maybe longer, I can't be sure, I panicked. I bolted upstairs as fast as I could, locked my bedroom door, and hid under the covers. I stayed there until exhaustion finally took over, only then allowing myself to fall asleep. From that night on, I never stayed downstairs late again. The worst part was knowing I could never tell my family. They are incredibly superstitious, and I was certain that if I told them about the figure, they would have panicked. They might have refused to stay in the house, or worse, they might have done something that could make the situation worse. So I kept it to myself, pretending everything was normal. Looking back, I realized that living alone in that huge house made everything worse. The emptiness of the rooms, the long hallways, the glass doors reflecting shadows, it all amplified the fear. And yet, even though nothing ever happened after that night, that figure, that feeling of being watched, stayed with me. Sometimes, years later, I would see a shadow move in the corner of my eye, or hear a faint sound that made my stomach drop. It's the kind of fear that doesn't need a physical explanation. It lingers in your mind long after the house is empty. Even now, I can remember the shape perfectly, the darkness that wasn't quite solid, the way it stood there, watching, waiting. It didn't hurt me, it didn't attack, it didn't speak. And yet, it was one of the most terrifying moments of my life. I never stayed in that part of the house alone at night again, and I never questioned my gut instincts about the warnings it gave me. That house taught me something I'll never forget. Sometimes The scariest things aren't loud or violent. They're quiet, subtle, and impossible to explain. They exist in the spaces where your logic says nothing should be, in the silence that fills an empty room. And sometimes they only need a second, just a glimpse, or a feeling to remind you that you are not alone. I don't know what that figure was, and I don't think I ever will. But I know one thing for sure. It changed the way I think about being alone in a large, quiet house, and it left me with a sense of caution that has never left me. Even when I live in smaller apartments or more modern buildings, the memory of that night comes back whenever I hear a strange noise or see a shadow out of the corner of my eye. It's the kind of memory that sticks with you, not because it's dramatic or violent, but because it's real in the only way that matters. You felt it, you experienced it, and it left a mark. And maybe that's what makes it so terrifying. I still remember that phase of my life very clearly, even though a lot of time has passed since then. It was around the time my parents went through a really messy divorce. My dad had always been the kind of person who could make anyone laugh, someone easygoing and fun to be around. But he had a completely different side to him if something pushed him too far. My mom, on the other hand, was much harder to understand. She seemed calm and put together on the surface. But things between them fell apart quickly after they got married, and I ended up caught in the middle of it all. After everything happened, my mom took me overseas for a few years. That period of my life feels distant now, like something that happened to someone else. Eventually, I came back and was placed in my dad's custody again. I was around 11 years old at the time, still trying to adjust to everything, and he put me in what used to be their bedroom. I didn't think much of it at first, but something about that room always felt off to me. The first thing that stood out was the wall of mirrors. Almost one full side of the room was covered in them, and I hated it right away. It made the space feel bigger, sure, but also colder, like I was never really alone in there. Every time I moved, there were multiple versions of me reflecting back, and at night it was even worse. It felt like the room was watching me instead of the other way around. Later on, and my dad admitted that the mirrors weren't there for decoration. He told me he had put them up to cover holes in the wall. Apparently, during one of their arguments, my mom had made him so angry that he punched through the drywall in a couple of places. Instead of fixing it properly, he just covered it all with mirrors. That explained a lot, but it didn't make me feel any better about sleeping in there. There was also this painting by the door. It was an oil painting of a ram, just a normal animal, nothing artistic or special about it, but for some reason, it always caught my attention. The way it was positioned made it one of the last things you'd see before leaving the room, and one of the first things you'd notice when you woke up. I never liked it, but I couldn't really explain why. The bedside lamp was another strange detail. It wasn't a regular lamp you'd buy from a store. My dad had made it himself, some kind of creative project of his. I'd used a short fluorescent tube, the kind that needed a starter to turn on. Normally, when you flipped the switch, it would flicker for a couple of seconds and then come to life. It wasn't perfect, but it worked well enough that I got used to it. A few years went by, and nothing too unusual happened in that room. I still didn't like it, but I learned to ignore the feeling. Then, one night, everything changed. I woke up suddenly, sometime around 1 in the morning. I wasn't sure what had woken me, but I felt alert right away. The house was completely quiet, the kind of silence that makes every little sound stand out. I decided to go downstairs and get a glass of water, something I had done plenty of times before, without any issue. As I sat up in bed, I turned my head slightly to the left, and that's when I saw it. The painting of the ram by the door looked different. Its eyes were glowing red. At first, I thought it was just my eyes playing tricks on me. Then maybe there was some light coming from outside or from another room that was reflecting off the surface in a weird way, but the glow didn't look like a reflection. It looked steady, almost alive. I froze. I just stared at it, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. My heart started beating faster, and I remember blinking hard, then squeezing my eyes shut for a second before opening them again. I expected it to be gone, but it wasn't. The eyes still looked like they were glowing, watching me. A panic started to set in, and my first instinct was to turn on the lamp. I reached over and flipped the switch, expecting the usual quick flicker before the light came on. But this time, nothing happened right away. The starter inside the lamp gave off a faint glow, like it was trying to work, but there was no arc, no flicker of the tube lighting up. I kept staring at it, waiting for it to come on, but it just stayed dim. Seconds passed, but it felt much longer, like time had slowed down. All the while I was still aware of the painting behind me. I didn't want to look at it again, but I could feel it there, like it was pulling my attention back. The room felt heavier, like the air itself had changed. After what felt like forever, maybe 10 seconds or so, I turned the switch off and then back on again, hoping it would kick-start the lamp. Again, there was that faint glow from the starter, but still no immediate light. I could feel my chest tightening, my breathing getting shallow as I waited. Finally, after what felt like at least 15 seconds, the fluorescent tube flickered and then lit up the room. The moment the light came on, I looked straight ahead, trying to ground myself in something normal. But what I saw made everything worse. On the wall between my bed and the closet, there was a large section covered in what looked like hundreds of tiny black dots. They were scattered across the surface, not moving exactly, but not completely still either. It was like they were fading in and out, slowly disappearing. At first, I thought my eyes were still adjusting to the sudden light. Maybe it was just a visual effect, something caused by the darkness or by staring too long at one spot. But the longer I looked, the more real it seemed. I turned my head toward the mirror across from my bed, and that's when I felt a real sense of fear. The same pattern of black dots was visible in the reflection, as in the exact same area of the wall. That meant it wasn't just in my head. It was actually there. I didn't move. I just sat there staring, trying to understand what I was looking at as the dots slowly faded away, one by one. It didn't happen all at once. It was gradual, like something was being erased from the wall. Eventually they were gone. The wall looked completely normal again, like nothing had ever been there. I stayed in bed the entire time. I didn't go downstairs for water. I didn't turn the light off. I just sat there, trying to calm myself down, replaying everything in my head and searching for a logical explanation. Maybe it was my imagination. Maybe I had been half asleep and dreaming. Maybe the lamp had some kind of electrical issue that caused weird visual effects. I went through every possible explanation I could think of, but none of them felt convincing. That night, I kept the lights on and turned the radio on as well, just to have some noise in the background. I didn't want to be alone in silence again. I barely slept after that. What's strange is that nothing like that ever happened again. The lamp went back to working normally, turning on after just a few seconds like it always had. The painting never looked unusual again. There were no more black dots. No more strange delays with the light. Nothing. But even now, I can't fully explain what I saw that night. It wasn't just a feeling or a vague memory. It was clear, detailed, and real in a way that's hard to dismiss. I don't talk about it often, mostly because I know how it sounds. It's the kind of thing people either laugh off or try to explain away. But I know what I experienced, and even after all this time, it still sits in the back of my mind. Some nights, when I wake up in the dark, I think about that room again. The mirrors, the painting, the silence, and the way the light refused to turn on when I needed it the most. And for a moment, I feel that same uneasiness creeping back, like whatever happened back then never really left. It just stopped showing itself. If you're still here, your nerves are stronger than most. Which story so far has crawled under your skin the worst, and why? Tell me in the comments and keep listening. The next ones don't just happen in the dark. They follow people into the daylight. It was late at night, the kind of quiet where everything feels still and heavy. Only my mom and I were home. She had already gone to sleep around 1 a.m., and I stayed up a little longer before finally deciding to go to bed myself. Nothing felt unusual at the time. It was just another normal night. I remember lying in bed, starting to drift off, that half-asleep state where your thoughts slow down and everything begins to fade. Then, without any warning, the fire alarm exploded into sound. It wasn't just loud, it was violent. The noise hit me like a shockwave. My whole body reacted instantly, like I'd been jolted awake by something dangerous. Adrenaline flooded through me so fast that I didn't even think. I just moved. I practically launched myself out of bed and ran straight for my bedroom door. My hands were shaking so badly that I couldn't even open it properly. I kept fumbling and smashing at the handle, panicking, trying to get it open as fast as possible. Every second that alarm kept blaring made it feel more urgent, more real, like the house could already be filling with smoke. When I finally got the door open, I rushed into the hallway so fast I almost slipped. I didn't stop. I ran straight to my mum's room, heart pounding, breath already uneven. I started hitting her door the same way, barely able to control my movements. Before I could even properly open it, she pulled it open from the inside. She was already awake, already alarmed. Neither of us said much. We didn't need to. The noise was enough. We both knew what it meant, or at least what it was supposed to mean. We rushed through the house together, checking everything, every room, every corner. We moved quickly, expecting to find something, smoke, fire, anything that would explain why the alarm had gone off like that. But there was nothing. No smell of burning, no heat, no smoke, no sign of anything wrong. We ended up downstairs, standing there in confusion, or trying to make sense of it. The alarm was still going, echoing through the house, making it impossible to think clearly, and then, just as suddenly as it had started, it stopped. No one touched it. No one turned it off. It just shut off on its own. The silence that followed felt just as intense as the noise had been. It was like the house was holding its breath. I remember standing there, trying to calm down, but the adrenaline was still pumping through me. My heart wouldn't slow down, while my mind kept racing. I tried to explain it logically. Maybe it was a malfunction. Maybe alarms sometimes go off for no reason. Later, I even looked it up. Apparently, fire alarms can go off randomly sometimes. Dust, humidity, or some kind of fault in the system. But what stuck with me wasn't just that it went off, it was the way it turned off, on its own. That part never sat right with me, and it wasn't the only strange thing that had happened in the house. There were other moments, always at night, always when things were quiet. One time, when it was just me and my mum again, she told me she had heard a loud crashing sound coming from the kitchen downstairs. Not a small noise, something heavy, sudden, like something had fallen or been knocked over. After that, she said she heard something even worse. Footsteps, not just random noise, but clear movement, like someone walking. She heard what sounded like someone coming up the stairs, step by step, and then heading toward my room. It sounded so real that she got up immediately to check on me, thinking someone might actually be in the house. But when she came to my room, there was nothing. No one there. No sign of anyone. Just silence. At the time, I didn't know what to think of that. It sounded terrifying, but also hard to believe. Until something similar happened to me. One night, I was home alone. Everything was quiet, just like before. Then suddenly, I heard it. That same kind of crashing noise from downstairs. It wasn't subtle, it wasn't something you could ignore or mistake for a small sound. It made me freeze instantly. My whole body tensed up, and I just stood there listening, trying to figure out what I had just heard. I didn't hear footsteps afterward like my mom did, but the crash alone was enough to shake me. It felt wrong, out of place. I tried to explain it to myself. I knew that sometimes things in the house can make noise. Pipes, furniture settling, even the sink can make a loud popping sound after it's been used. But this didn't sound like that. It was sharper, heavier, more deliberate. That's what made it stick with me. Individually, each of these things might have a reasonable explanation, a faulty alarm, a random noise, an overactive imagination late at night. But together, they start to feel different. The fire alarm going off for no reason, then stopping on its own. The sound of something crashing in the kitchen. The footsteps that shouldn't have been there. It's the kind of thing you can try to explain away during the day when everything feels normal again. But at night, when the house is quiet and you're lying in bed with nothing but your thoughts, it feels a lot harder to ignore. If ghosts are real, then I'm pretty sure I grew up with one in my house. It wasn't something I understood at the time, and honestly, even now I don't fully know what to make of it. But looking back, there were too many things that happened, too consistently, for me to just brush it all off as coincidence or imagination. I used to spend a lot of time alone in that house. My mum worked nights, so most evenings it was just me and my dog. The house itself wasn't particularly old or obviously creepy. It looked like any normal home. But the atmosphere inside could change in a way that's hard to explain unless you felt it yourself. The first sign that something wasn't right wasn't even directed at me. It was my dog. She would be perfectly fine one moment, calm, relaxed, just doing her usual thing. And then suddenly, from another room, I would hear her yelp. Not a playful sound, or not the kind of noise dogs make when they're excited or dreaming. This was sharp, sudden, like she had been hurt or scared. Then she would come running. Every time it happened, she would bolt out of whatever room she had been in, moving as fast as she could, like she was trying to get away from something. She wouldn't look back. She'd come straight to me, tense and alert, sometimes even shaking. And almost every time that happened, things would start happening in my room shortly after. Or at first it was small things, easy to ignore if you didn't think about them too much. The TV would turn off on its own. The volume would change without anyone touching the remote. Sometimes I'd hear noises coming from the kitchen, like something falling or shifting or being knocked over. I'd go check, expecting to find a mess, something out of place, some kind of explanation. But there was never anything there. Everything would be exactly as it should be, like the sound had come from nowhere. You can tell yourself a lot of things to make that kind of stuff easier to deal with. Old wiring, faulty electronics, pipes in the walls, your imagination playing tricks on you. I told myself all of those things. I had to. But there was one moment that I still can't explain, no matter how much time passes. I remember exactly where I was. I was in my room, standing near my dresser. One of the drawers was open, my second drawer, and the one where I kept random things. Inside it, there was a metal candlestick holder. It was lying on its side, nothing unusual about it. I wasn't touching it. I wasn't even that close to it. And then it moved, not slowly, not subtly. It didn't shift or slide like something might if the drawer was tilted or bumped. It flew. Right in front of me, the candlestick holder shot from one side of the drawer to the other, fast and hard enough that it slammed into the side with a sharp, clear sound. I just stood there, staring at it, trying to process what I had just seen. There was no delay, no confusion about whether it had actually happened. I saw it clearly. I heard it. There was no way to explain it as anything else. Nothing had touched it. There was no movement around it that could have caused it. It just moved. That was the moment where everything shifted for me. Up until then, I could pretend there was a reasonable explanation for things. I could tell myself I was overthinking it, that there was some logical cause I just hadn't figured out yet. But after seeing that happen right in front of me, there wasn't anything left to hold on to. It made everything else feel different too. The sounds, the electronics acting strangely, my dog's behavior, it all felt connected in a way I couldn't ignore anymore. And still, I didn't talk about it. Even now, I rarely do. It's one of those experiences that sounds unbelievable the moment you say it out loud. People either try to explain it away or look at you like you're exaggerating, or worse, like you're not entirely credible. Over time, as nothing else happened, the intensity of it faded a little. The longer I went without experiencing anything strange, the more distant it all started to feel. Like it belonged to a different version of my life, something that couldn't quite reach into the present anymore. But no matter how much time passes, I can't convince myself it wasn't real. I remember the sound of that candlestick hitting the side of the drawer. I remember exactly how it looked, how fast it moved, how impossible it felt in that moment. I remember my dog running into the room, scared of something I couldn't see. Maybe there's an explanation for all of it that I just don't understand. Maybe there isn't. All I know is that it happened. And even now, thinking back on it, there's still a part of me that wonders what exactly was in that house with us, and why it never felt like it wanted to be seen, only noticed. In my parents' house, the kitchen was open style, and the entryway to it was perpendicular to the hallway. From the living room, you could catch glimpses of anyone walking past that entryway, as it stuck out just enough that movement didn't go unnoticed. I was sitting on the couch in the living room one evening, relaxing after a long day, while my girlfriend at the time was in the kitchen, preparing something or maybe just grabbing a snack. Everything felt normal, quiet, peaceful, and the kind of calm that usually comes when the house is empty except for the two of us. Then, out of the corner of my eye, I thought I saw a shadow, or maybe a figure, move across the entryway as if someone were walking through the hallway. I blinked, rubbed my eyes and shook my head, thinking I was just imagining things. The mind can play tricks when it's tired, and I tried to convince myself it was nothing. I said nothing about it, pretending I hadn't noticed, and continued scrolling on my phone. A few moments later, my girlfriend stepped toward the hallway, glancing around like she'd seen something too. I called out, "Hey, what are you doing?" She turned toward me, a little startled, and said, "I thought I saw someone walk by here just now." My stomach sank. I froze for a moment before blurting out, "Holy crap! Me too." We both stared at each other for a second, unsure of what we had just witnessed. There was no explanation. My parents were out of town. The house was empty except for us, and yet it felt like someone had been walking through the hallway. After that, I didn't feel comfortable being alone in the house. Every night for the rest of their trip, I made sure to have at least 5 friends stay over. It was a mix of paranoia and self-preservation, but the truth was, I wasn't taking any chances. The house had always had that faint sense of being watched, but that night, it became undeniable. One night during one of these sleepovers, and we decided to mess around with a Milton Bradley Ouija board. It was supposed to be a joke, something fun and slightly spooky, a way to test the stories we had heard about the house. Some of my friends were genuinely interested, while others were acting way too cool, like nothing could scare them. One of them, probably trying to play it off, ended up leaving the group and heading to my room to play Mario Kart instead. Hours later, he told us something that gave me chills. While he was in my room, waiting for the rest of us to finish our session, he saw weird red lights moving across the walls. They weren't just random flashes. They seemed to dance, flicker, and float in a pattern that was almost hypnotic. He couldn't explain what he had seen, and neither could any of us. The thought of it lingered, sticking in my mind long after he went to bed. Years passed, and life moved on. The memory of that night faded into the background, just another strange, unexplained moment from my youth. But then, after a difficult breakup, I found myself moving back into my parents' house. They spent most of the year in another state, and they trusted me to keep an eye on things while they were away. I took my old room, the one where the red lights had appeared years ago, and settled back in. At first, everything felt normal. The house had changed a bit, furniture moved around, walls repainted, but it still held that same faintly eerie feeling, like it remembered all the secrets it had seen. And then, in the middle of the night, I started noticing something. I would wake up suddenly, heart racing for no apparent reason, feeling that irrational fear that comes when you know something isn't quite right. And there it was again, those red lights, flickering and dancing across the walls, subtle at first, then more pronounced, like they were alive in some strange way. I tried to rationalize it, telling myself it was just my eyes adjusting to the dark, a trick of shadows and memory. But deep down, I knew it wasn't just that. It was exactly what my friend had described seeing years ago in the same room. The thought of it made the hairs on my neck stand up. It wasn't a fleeting memory or imagination. It was real, at least in some form, and it had waited all those years to be seen again. Every time I tried to go back to sleep, I felt those red lights lingering in my mind, the edges of my vision still catching them out of the corner of my eye. Sometimes they seemed closer, floating near the ceiling or hovering by the corners of the room. Other times they danced along the floor, fading in and out like they were teasing me. I could never tell if they were truly there or if I was just remembering my friend's story and projecting it onto my own perception. Eventually, I stopped trying to fight it. I would sit in the darkness, watching the faint red glow move, almost as if the house had a heartbeat of its own. It didn't feel threatening, not exactly. It was more like a presence, aware of me, acknowledging that I was there. Over time, I realized that it wasn't just the red lights or the shadowy figure. It was the sense that the house remembered everything that had happened within its walls. Every prank, every late-night adventure, every laugh and every fear had been absorbed and stored somewhere in the air, waiting for someone to notice. I never fully understood what I'd experienced, and I don't know if anyone else ever will. The figure in the hallway, the dancing red lights, the unexplained fear, they were part of the house now, inseparable from its memory. And while I eventually moved out again, I always remembered those nights, the way the lights flickered just beyond reach, the way the house seemed alive in ways I could never explain. Even now, I think back to that first moment, sitting on the couch and catching movement out of the corner of my eye. I wonder what it was. If it was something or someone watching over the house, or if it was simply a memory playing tricks on me, repeating itself through time. All I know is that it left an impression I'll never forget, a quiet reminder that some things can't be explained, and some presences can linger far longer than we ever expect. One summer, a group of friends and I decided to spend the weekend visiting another friend who lived about 2 hours away. Her house was in a relatively new subdivision, maybe 10 to 15 years old at the most. It was a quiet cul-de-sac, with a small park surrounding it on one side, giving the neighborhood a peaceful, almost secluded feel. The kind of place that seems safe, but sometimes the quiet can make the strange things feel louder. We got to her house, unpacked, and settled in. By the time we finished arranging sleeping spots, it was probably around 1 a.m. Everyone else was already in bed, drifting off, the soft sounds of breathing and the occasional creak of the house blending into the night. I lay on my side, facing the window, stuck in that strange state between being awake and asleep, a place I've always called the in-between. It happens to me fairly often, that fuzzy line where your mind is just about to fall asleep, but still aware of the room around you. In that state, you see weird things, shapes, shadows, half-dreams. Your brain blurs reality and imagination, and it's hard to tell where one ends and the other begins. That night, as I was lying there, I saw something that made my heart race. Out of nowhere, a figure appeared at the window. It looked like a man, with a shaved head, wearing a red shirt. At first, I tried to convince myself it was a dream, just a product of my half-asleep mind. But the figure wasn't blurry like usual dream shapes. It was oddly distinct. I watched, frozen, as he climbed through the window with ease, almost silently, and stepped into the room. He moved slowly, deliberately, walking around the bed before lying down on the floor. I told myself it was just a dream. I had been in that in-between state many times before, seeing all sorts of strange things that disappeared the moment I fully woke up. I didn't mention it to anyone at the time. I'm trying to shake it off as my imagination running wild in the quiet of the night. It wasn't until the last day of the visit that I finally brought it up with my friends. I casually mentioned the man in the red shirt, expecting some teasing or skepticism. But instead, one of my friends froze, her face draining of color. She had slept in the room next to mine, and when I described the figure, she asked softly, almost in disbelief, "Was he bald? Like a shaved head?" I nodded, and her eyes widened in horror. She told me that she had seen the exact same figure climb through her window during the night. She had hidden under the covers, paralyzed with fear, and hadn't dared to move or see what the figure did afterward. At the time, she had assumed it was a nightmare, a trick of her imagination. But now, hearing me describe it, she realized it had been real, or at least real to us in the same way. We didn't have any rational explanation. The windows had been closed and locked as far as we knew, the house was ordinary, and no one had entered or left. Yet, two of us had seen the same figure independently in different rooms of the house in the middle of the night. We were both creeped out in a way that stayed with us even after we returned home. It wasn't the most dramatic story, no sudden screams or violent encounters, but the memory of that red-shirted figure with the shaved head still gives me chills. The way he moved, silently, deliberately, and the fact that he appeared in two rooms for two different people is something that defies explanation. Even years later, when I think back to that night, I can still picture him climbing through the window, laying there on the floor, watching, and I can feel that same unsettling fear that made both of us too afraid to move. When I first moved into my dorm, I didn't think much about how I used my laptop. I kept it on my desk, plugged in most of the time, and I almost never shut it down before going to sleep. I would just leave it running overnight, sometimes with a few tabs open, sometimes with music paused, and then I'd climb into bed and pass out. At the time, I knew it probably wasn't great for the laptop, but it felt convenient, and nothing bad seemed to happen at first. After a while, though, and I started noticing small things that didn't make sense. The first few times, I brushed it off completely. I would wake up in the morning, still half asleep, and look over at my desk. My laptop screen would be on just like I left it, but something felt off. When I got up and checked it, I would see tabs open that I didn't remember opening. At first, I thought I had just forgotten. Maybe I opened them late at night and didn't remember. That seemed like the most logical explanation. But the more it happened, the less that explanation made sense. These weren't my usual tabs. It wasn't like I left YouTube or social media open. It was random stuff. One morning, there was a Microsoft help page open, like I'd been troubleshooting something. Another time, there was a dating site open. I just stared at it for a while, trying to remember if I had clicked on it by accident or something. I hadn't. I lived alone in that dorm room. No one else had access to my laptop. There was no reason for anything to be opening on its own. Still, I tried to stay rational. I told myself it had to be something simple. Maybe I was clicking things without realizing it before bed. Maybe something was glitching. I didn't think too deeply about it. Then one morning, something happened that I couldn't ignore. I woke up suddenly, not slowly like usual, but all at once. The room felt loud. For a second, I didn't even understand why. Then I realized. Music was playing, not softly, and not in the background, but loud enough to fill the entire room. I turned my head and saw my laptop screen glowing in the dark. Spotify was open and it was playing music. Not anything I had been listening to before going to bed. It was something completely different, something I didn't even recognize at first. The sound felt aggressive, almost jarring, especially because I had been asleep just seconds before. It took me a moment to fully wake up and process what was happening. And then I recognized the artist. It was Death Grips. The track was loud, chaotic, and completely out of place for how I usually listen to music. I just sat there in bed for a few seconds, staring at the screen, trying to understand how it even started. I hadn't touched the laptop. I hadn't queued anything. I hadn't even been using Spotify before I went to sleep that night. I got up and stopped the music, but the feeling didn't go away. It stayed there in the back of my mind. It's making everything feel slightly off. After that, I started trying to figure it out. I didn't want to jump to weird conclusions. I wanted a normal explanation. The first thing I blamed was the touchscreen. I thought maybe dust or something was triggering it during the night. Maybe something was registering as input and causing things to open. So I changed my routine. Before going to bed, I started closing the laptop instead of leaving it open. I thought that would solve it. It didn't. Or I would still wake up to find strange tabs open. Sometimes the laptop would be on the login screen. Other times things would already be open and running. It was like something had been interacting with it while I was asleep. Then I thought maybe it was the mouse. Maybe it was moving slightly on its own or getting bumped somehow. So I started turning the mouse off before going to bed. That didn't fix it either. No matter what I tried, it kept happening. Tabs would open. Programs would run. Music would start playing. But the strangest part wasn't just that it was happening. It was when it was happening. It only ever happened at night. More specifically, it only happened while I was asleep. If I left my laptop on and went to class during the day, nothing would change. I could leave it for hours, come back, and everything would be exactly how I left it. If I stepped out of the dorm for a while, same thing. Nothing. No random tabs, no music, no weird activity. But the moment I left it on overnight and went to sleep, something would happen. Every time. That pattern is what started to bother me the most. It didn't feel random anymore. It felt targeted. Eventually, I gave up trying to work around it. I started shutting the laptop down completely every night before going to sleep. Not sleep mode, not just closing the lid, but fully shutting it down. That was the only thing that stopped it. As long as it was completely off, nothing happened. But even then, the feeling didn't go away. It just changed. Instead of confusion, it turned into something else, because I never really figured out what caused it, and deep down, I wasn't sure I wanted to. Around that same time, something else happened in that dorm that stuck with me just as much. One night, I was sitting at my desk using my laptop. It was late, probably around 1 in the morning. The room was quiet, and the only real light came from the screen in front of me. My desk faced the window, and through it, I could see a building across the street. It was a hospital. It wasn't too far away, maybe around 100 yards or so. Close enough that I could clearly see parts of it, especially at night when everything else was dark. Most of the building was quiet. Almost all the windows were dark, like the lights had been turned off for the night. But there was one room that stood out immediately. Its lights were on, and not just on, but extremely bright. It was the kind of brightness that makes you notice it without even trying. Compared to the rest of the building, it looked almost unnatural. At first, I didn't think much of it. It's a hospital, after all. Lights being on at odd hours isn't strange. I figured it was probably some kind of medical equipment or a room in use. So I went back to what I was doing. After a while, though, something changed. I noticed a small point of light. It was coming from that same window. At first, it was faint, like a reflection or something minor. But then it became clearer. It was shining directly toward my room. I leaned back slightly, trying to get a better look. The light moved. It wasn't steady. It wasn't fixed in one place like a normal light source. It moved slowly across my window, then shifted direction, then moved again, like someone was pointing it. I stayed still, watching it. The light traced across the glass, moving in small, uneven patterns. It didn't feel random, but it also didn't feel controlled in a normal way. It was just moving, back and forth, side to side, sometimes pausing, sometimes shifting suddenly. I looked back at the hospital window. The bright lights were still on in that room, just as intense as before. But I couldn't see anyone inside. No silhouettes, no movement. Nothing that explained the light pointing directly into my room. And that was the strange part. Out of all the windows in that building, out of all the possible directions, that light was focused on mine. I sat there for a long time, just watching it, trying to make sense of it. Eventually, it stopped. The light disappeared as suddenly as it had appeared. The room across the street stayed lit for a while longer. Then, at some point later, even that went dark. That was the only night I ever saw that room lit up like that. And the only night a light ever pointed directly into my window, between the laptop and that night. As something about that dorm never felt completely normal to me. I tried to explain it in simple ways, glitches, coincidences, random events that just happened to line up in a weird way. But the more I thought about it, the harder it became to believe that. Because it wasn't just one thing, it was a pattern. Things happening when they shouldn't, at times when I couldn't see them happening, and stopping the moment I tried to prove it. Even now, I don't have a clear answer for any of it. All I know is that during that time, in that dorm, things didn't always behave the way they were supposed to. And some nights, it felt like something else was there, interacting with my space in ways I couldn't understand. Not loudly, not aggressively, just enough to let me know it was happening, and that was more than enough. This all happened about 4 years ago, when I was a sophomore in college. At the time, I had just moved into a new 2-bedroom apartment with my brother. It was one of those typical college setups. Nothing fancy, but enough space for the both of us. The apartment had a small living room, a kitchen that was bigger than I expected for a student place, and the 2 bedrooms upstairs. My brother was finishing up the lease at his old place. So, for the first couple of months, I was living alone. Well, alone is a bit of a stretch because my girlfriend would basically stay over every night. Still, when she wasn't there, I was by myself, and that quiet, empty feeling of a big apartment at night has a way of making you hyper-aware of every little sound. One night, it was already very late, like 2 a.m. My girlfriend and I were upstairs in my room, lying on the bed, watching South Park on my laptop. It was the kind of night where everything outside is silent, or the kind of quiet that makes even small noises in the apartment feel unnervingly loud. We were laughing at some ridiculous joke on the show when she suddenly rolled over and asked, half asleep, half serious, if I could get her a bowl of ice cream. I teased her a little, saying, "Sure, but only if you come downstairs with me." She pouted, gave me this classic puppy-eyed look that made it impossible to say no, and I sighed, realizing I'd lose the argument either way. "Fine," I said, standing up and heading toward the stairs. The kitchen was downstairs, diagonally across from the doorway to the living room. It was bigger than I expected, with plenty of counter space and a refrigerator that took up most of the wall. I considered turning on the light, but the hallway light was already on, and I thought, it'll just take a second to scoop some ice cream. I don't need the kitchen light. I opened the fridge, grabbed the ice cream container, and started scooping out the first serving. My mind wandered a bit, and I thought, why not make some for myself too? So I scooped a second bowl, just for me. The kitchen was silent except for the faint hum of the refrigerator. Everything felt normal until I heard it. It was a voice, soft but unmistakable, coming from the kitchen doorway. I froze for a moment, spoon halfway out of the container. "Zach?" My heart skipped a beat. I was startled, caught completely off guard. Without thinking, I muttered, "What?" and spun around instinctively, but there was nothing there. No one. My first thought was that my girlfriend must have snuck downstairs while I was scooping. But then, in that split second, my brain went through the logical checklist. Wait, where are the stairs? Did I hear her come down? No, the stairs are creaky. I would have heard them. The realization hit me like a cold splash of water. No one had come downstairs. The kitchen was empty, and then came the cold. A sharp, sudden drop in temperature that made the hairs on my neck stand up. The apartment was late fall, still chilly outside, but I had the heater running all night, so feeling that sudden cold was not just uncomfortable, it was deeply unsettling. I stood there for a moment, frozen, listening. The only sound was the faint hum of the refrigerator and the soft creak of the apartment settling. I grabbed my girlfriend's bowl of ice cream, barely noticing the scoop slipping as my hands shook slightly. I forced myself to put the container back in the freezer, trying not to think about what had just happened. I walked as quickly as I could back upstairs, avoiding the middle of the hallway where the shadows seemed a little darker than normal, and entered my room. I told my girlfriend what happened, trying to keep my voice steady, but I could see the fear in her eyes. From that night on, she refused to go anywhere in the apartment alone. Even walking from the bedroom to the bathroom without me felt too scary for her. She wasn't exaggerating. There was something about the silence, the sudden cold, and that voice that was hard to explain. We never figured out what it was. There were no signs of anyone breaking in, no open doors or windows. The apartment was locked tight, and no one else had keys. I checked the security cameras in the building. Nothing unusual. It was just a voice, clearly human, distinctly calling my name. And yet no one was there. Even now, thinking about it gives me chills. After that night, I started noticing little things. Not overtly frightening things, but subtle, eerie details that made me question what I had experienced. Sometimes I would hear faint noises coming from the kitchen when I was upstairs. Sometimes I would feel a sudden chill in one corner of the apartment, like someone had just walked through. My girlfriend refused to sleep over for a while, and I didn't argue. I couldn't shake the memory of that voice. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe I had been half asleep, and my brain tricked me into hearing a voice. Maybe it was a neighbor, though it's hard to imagine anyone's voice traveling through walls that thick. Maybe it was the house settling or the pipes, but none of that explained the cold, the timing, the way it felt like someone was right there in the doorway. And none of that explained why my girlfriend had been terrified as well, and even though she hadn't seen or heard anything herself at that exact moment. Weeks passed, and life returned to normal, or as normal as it could feel after that experience. I got used to living alone in the apartment, though I still felt a little tense whenever I walked through the kitchen late at night. I started keeping a small flashlight by the bed, just in case I needed it. I didn't want to admit it, but part of me wondered if that voice had been some kind of warning, or maybe just a random, inexplicable phenomenon. Looking back, it's not the scariest thing that's ever happened to me, but it's one of those moments that sticks with you. The kind of moment that makes you pause in an empty room and double-check your surroundings, just in case. The fact that I could hear something so clearly in a space I knew like the back of my hand, and yet see nothing at all, is something I'll never forget. Even now, when I think about that night, I feel a shiver run down my spine. It's not about gore or anything physically threatening. It's about the sheer presence of something unexplained in a space I thought was completely safe. The silence, the cold, and that voice calling my name. It all lingers in my memory like a quiet, persistent echo that refuses to be ignored. I moved out of that apartment eventually, and my brother took over the lease. I never told him about the incident, not because I wanted to keep it a secret, but because it seemed like one of those things that couldn't be explained and might just freak him out unnecessarily. My girlfriend and I laugh about it now in a nervous, slightly uncomfortable way. She still refuses to stay anywhere unfamiliar alone at night, and I can't say I blame her. Sometimes, when I hear a noise in a quiet apartment or a sudden whisper in the dark, my mind drifts back to that night. And every time, I'm reminded that even in places we feel completely safe, there can still be moments that make your skin crawl, moments that remind you just how small and unprepared we are for the unknown. It's strange how something so simple, a late-night craving for ice cream, can turn into a memory that haunts you for years. I never saw anything, never had any other encounters in that apartment. But that night, hearing that voice and realizing no one was there will always stay with me. It's one of those experiences that changes the way you think about empty rooms, late nights, and the quiet spaces where something or someone might be watching or waiting. Even though I try to rationalize it, part of me knows I'll never truly understand what happened. And maybe that's the point. Some things aren't meant to be explained. Some things are meant to be felt, remembered, and approached with a quiet, uneasy respect. I still get chills thinking about it. My wife and I had always loved visiting old houses, historic sites, and anything that carried a sense of the past. So when we learned that a well-known historic home in the city where we lived offered guided tours, we decided it would be the perfect weekend outing. We arrived in the late morning, the kind of day where the air is warm, but there's a crispness hinting at the coming evening, and the streets around the historic district felt unusually quiet. Even in a busy city, there's something about areas preserved for history that softens the noise of modern life, as if the old buildings themselves demand a slower, more thoughtful pace. The house was impressive, even from the outside, standing tall with its carefully preserved architecture, large windows, and intricate woodwork. It was the kind of house that seemed alive, even when empty, as if it had absorbed generations of memories. We joined the guided tour, a small group of people following a woman who spoke in a calm, measured voice about the house's history, its original owners, and the changes it had gone through over the centuries. The guide knew the story of every room, every painting, and every piece of furniture. We listened politely, but my attention kept drifting to the way the sunlight fell through the tall windows, casting long, sharp shadows across the polished wooden floors. After about an hour of touring with the group, we were finally allowed to explore on our own. The tour guide encouraged us to take our time, look at anything that caught our eye, and imagine what life must have been like in the house decades, even centuries ago. My wife and I wandered quietly up the stairs to the second floor. The staircase itself was impressive, dark wood polished to a shine, and the air smelled faintly of old books and waxed floors, a comforting yet slightly musty scent that seemed to belong to the house's memory rather than the present. We entered one of the bedrooms at the end of the hallway. It was a modestly sized room with a tall ceiling, antique furniture, and curtains that swayed lightly in the breeze from an open window. I found myself lingering near the window, watching the sun begin to dip behind the trees surrounding the property. My wife moved across the room, examining a dresser with delicate carvings, occasionally pointing out little details to me. That's when it happened. Out of the corner of my eye, I noticed movement in the hallway. At first, I thought it might be another visitor, maybe someone we had missed on the tour, or someone who had wandered in behind us. But the figure that moved into view was not like any visitor I had ever seen. It was a woman, her posture straight and deliberate, walking slowly down the hallway. She was dressed in clothing that seemed completely out of place. Not something contemporary, but clearly from a period consistent with when the house was first built. The long dress, high collar, and delicate fabric looked like something lifted from a painting, something you would expect in a reenactment or maybe a historical film. I didn't say anything at first, unsure if my eyes were deceiving me. But then I felt a nudge of certainty. It was real, or at least it seemed real. "Did you see her?" my wife asked softly, her voice carrying the kind of caution people use when they think they might be imagining things. "Yes," I whispered back, my voice catching slightly. They must have reenactors here, walking around the house. The thought made sense, at least on the surface. Many historic homes hire actors to dress in period clothing and move through the rooms, giving visitors a sense of what life might have been like. It was the most reasonable explanation I could come up with. We both walked cautiously into the hallway to get a better look, expecting to see someone just ahead, perhaps guiding themselves with the railing or moving purposefully from room to room. But when we reached the spot where the figure should have been, there was nothing. The hallway was empty, quiet except for the faint creak of the floorboards under our feet. At that moment, a strange chill ran down my spine, though I tried to dismiss it. We left the house shortly after, walking across the manicured grounds toward the visitor center to ask where the reenactors were stationed. The property was expansive, and even in daylight, it had an eerie stillness, as if the walls themselves were watching. The visitor center was small, but well kept, with brochures neatly stacked, and a woman behind the desk who looked friendly enough, if slightly distracted. We asked her about the reenactors, explaining that we thought we had seen someone dressed in period clothing on the second floor. She tilted her head, a faint frown appearing on her face. "There aren't any," she said. Her voice was polite, but carried a weight that made me pause. We exchanged glances, feeling that mix of confusion and unease that comes when something seems obvious but doesn't match reality. We described what we had seen, the woman, the dress, the way she moved, and how she seemed perfectly real for a moment. Or the tour guide, who had just arrived at the visitor center, overheard us. She looked uncomfortable, glancing at us with a seriousness that immediately made my stomach tighten. "Second floor hallway?" she asked cautiously, her eyes flicking away briefly before returning to ours. Up until that point, neither of us had felt genuinely scared. We had thought it was just a staff member or someone working in the house. But something in her tone made my hair stand on end. The kind of instinctive reaction that comes from sensing that something isn't quite right, that the world isn't as solid and predictable as it seems. "We aren't supposed to talk about it," she said, lowering her voice. "But, yeah, lots of people have reported seeing her. She walks down toward the window, looks out, and disappears. We don't know who she is." Her words hung in the air like a shadow, heavy and impossible to ignore. The feeling of disbelief that I had clung to dissolved immediately, it replaced by a quiet, gnawing dread. It wasn't just us. This had happened to others, over and over, each visitor or staff member seeing the same woman at the same place, walking the same path, and vanishing without a trace. We went back several times over the next few months, drawn by curiosity, perhaps by the need to confront what we had seen. Every visit, we explored the second floor thoroughly, checking every room, every corner, and every window. But we never saw her again. Not once. The hallway remained empty, the light streaming through the windows, the house quiet, seemingly ordinary. Yet the memory stayed with us. Every time I think of that house, I remember the brief instant when the woman appeared, perfectly formed, moving with purpose, yet vanishing the moment I tried to confirm her presence. There was a sense of continuity to it, a thread connecting all those who had seen her before us, all those who would see her after. The house itself seemed to hold the story, or an invisible witness to centuries of life, secrets, and perhaps something else that could not be explained. Even now, years later, recalling that moment makes my skin tingle. It wasn't a nightmare or a trick of the light. It was something else, something that existed in the space between reality and memory, visible just long enough to leave an impression, then gone before it could be understood. The house, with its creaking floors, tall windows, and silent rooms, felt like a living thing, or quietly carrying the echoes of the past in ways I could never have predicted. It's strange how certain experiences can linger, even when they are brief. That one sighting, those few seconds on the second-floor hallway, became a defining memory of the trip. It changed the way I think about the house, about what might inhabit these historic places, and about the small moments when the world seems just a little stranger than it should. We left the city that weekend with a story that didn't have answers, but with a sense that some things are meant to be seen, if only for a moment, and then never again. About 8 years ago, I was living with my ex-boyfriend, his father, and his grandmother in a house that had a mix of old and new sections. The original part of the house had 2 small, old rooms, and later on, 3 newer rooms had been added, along with a top floor that stretched above the rest. The family whispered about the old lady who lived there. Some even said she had poisoned her husband for cheating. Supposedly, he was found dead in the back of his truck. He was a truck driver and spent months at a time on the road, so the story only added an eerie backdrop to the already strange energy in the house. I remember one night, it was around midnight, maybe 1 in the morning, when I decided to do some studying. I was in law school at the time, so my books were always with me. I went down to the kitchen with my notes and laptop, thinking I'd get some quiet time. The kitchen was old, with creaky floors and cabinets that hadn't been updated in decades. As I pulled out my books and organized my papers, I suddenly heard a sound. It wasn't just a regular noise. The air seemed to hum with it. It was a whistle, almost like someone was singing or humming a song. I froze. The sound was so clear and deliberate that I couldn't believe it was coming from a soda bottle or anything like that. I shrugged it off that night, telling myself maybe it was just my imagination. The next day, I told my ex and his father what I'd heard, and they immediately dismissed it. "It's probably just a soda bottle not closed properly," his father said. But I knew enough about bottles and whistling to know that a soda bottle couldn't produce anything that sounded like a song. A few weeks later, another strange thing happened, and this one shook me more than the whistling. I was lying in bed in the old part of the house, the room that had belonged to the original structure. My ex was in the bathroom getting ready to sleep. And the house was quiet, the kind of quiet where every small sound seems louder than it really is. Then, out of nowhere, I smelled it, a strong hospital-like odor, a mix of bleach and medicine. It was overpowering. And then I heard it, someone calling my name. I yelled for my boyfriend, but there was no response. He came into the room a few moments later, looking confused. "What are you shouting about?" he asked. I told him to repeat whatever he'd just said, but he didn't call me. And my heart was racing, and I couldn't explain the smell or the voice. I just sat there, trying to shake it off, telling myself I was imagining things. Later on, I shared this experience with my ex's brother, who had once lived in that same room with his wife. He told me something that made the hair on my arms stand on end. One night, he and his wife had been joking around, trying to scare each other. He kept teasing her, making jokes like, "There's a face at the window," just to get a reaction. Then, at one point, he said, "Hey, do you remember Grandpa?" And the closet door swung open with a horrifying, loud creak. Both of them screamed and were so scared they slept with the lights on that night. Hearing that, I realized I wasn't imagining things. There was no rational explanation for the noises, the smells, or the sudden appearances. And the house seemed to have a personality of its own, one that didn't like being ignored. There was one more incident before I finally decided I had had enough. It happened to both me and my ex, and it was the kind of thing that makes you question everything you think you know about the world. I can still remember the feeling of dread that evening, the oppressive weight in the air, and the sense that we were not alone, even though the house was empty. After that, I packed up my things and left the house for good, knowing that some places are better left unexplored. Even now, thinking back on that house gives me chills. The combination of old architecture, family history, and inexplicable events created an atmosphere that felt alive in the worst way. Every creak, every shadow, every strange smell could trigger that same fear I felt those nights. And though I've moved on and never returned, the memories of that house and the things I experienced there have never left me. You've just heard hours of real encounters from ordinary people. Now I want to know, which moment will keep you awake tonight? And if something like this had happened in your own home, would you stay or move out? If you want more true horror like this, like the video and subscribe, then share your own story below if you're ready to talk about it.